They banned the weapon that could tip the balance of power, so humanity built something worse. Not to rule the galaxy, but to make sure no one else ever would. What happens when the most feared weapon is guided by the most disciplined hands? Subscribe for more untold legends of humanity's rise, because this is only the beginning. They called it the end of an era. The day the stellar lance was fired, the stars themselves seemed to weep. A binary system blinked out in an instant, 2 suns consumed, 6 planets shattered, and over 1 billion lives erased in the span of a single breath. The Council swore such devastation could never be allowed again. They convened emergency sessions, rewrote the core laws, and banned the weapon across every known territory. Its creators were tried, exiled, or executed. And the stellar lance was buried, its blueprints locked in forbidden archives, its very mention reduced to whispers and ghost stories. The galaxy moved on, shaking under the weight of what had nearly been lost. Humanity wasn't part of the stars then. Earth was still finding its footing with crude ships and slow transmissions, gazing outward with more hope than understanding. When humans finally arrived at the galactic table centuries later, they came not with warships, but with wide eyes and open hands. They learned quickly. They adapted faster. And in just a few decades they became indispensable: engineers, diplomats, strategists. But something about them never sat right with the Council. The elders of the more ancient species said it first. "They're too curious," one warned. "Too emotional. Too bold," another whispered. "They will push where others fear to tread. That is their gift, and their danger." Still, the Council tolerated them. Humanity's innovations were too valuable to ignore. Energy grids improved. Fleet tactics evolved. Disease eradication methods spread like wildfire. Yet even as humanity built up galactic civilization, trust never followed. It was during an archival exchange between the Terran Science Guild and the Archivum of Eldoria that they first stumbled upon it. Not the weapon itself, but a name hidden in redacted files: Project Stellar Lance. The humans asked, naturally. The Archivum told them, reluctantly. A weapon so powerful, so final, that the galaxy had erased all trace of it. Earth listened quietly, absorbing every word. They didn't protest the ban. They didn't question the ethics. They simply nodded and moved on. Or so the Council thought. The truth was simpler than fiction. Humanity feared the stellar lance. Not because of its power, but because of how easily it could be built again. The principles behind it weren't arcane. The materials weren't rare. The method, although brutal, was elegant in its simplicity. A weapon that could puncture a star's core and trigger a supernova chain reaction? In a galaxy built on stars, that was apocalypse in a box. Humanity understood that better than anyone. But what truly unnerved the Council wasn't humanity's fear. It was their fascination. In closed-door meetings on Earth, quiet conversations unfolded. "They banned the idea," one scientist said. "But not the science. Military think tanks simulated models, purely theoretical, of course. How much energy could be channeled through quantum-threaded rail systems? Could dark matter be stabilized long enough to seed a reaction?" Questions piled upon questions. Not for war. For knowledge. The Council began to monitor Earth more closely. Science was tolerated. Ambition was not. One by one, Terran research initiatives were pressured into shutting down. Grants revoked. Stations sanctioned. The message was clear: curiosity, in this area, was not welcome. Earth complied. At least, publicly. What the Council didn't understand was that for humans, forbidden knowledge is the most tempting of all. A small team of Terran physicists, brilliant, obsessive, and unreasonably brave, began their own research. Not under governments. Not under corporations. In deep space bunkers and Martian sublabs, they resurrected the theories, challenging each other to find safer ways to manipulate the energies once harnessed by the stellar lance. It wasn't about building the weapon. Not yet. It was about proving that the Council's fear was outdated. That knowledge could be understood, not just locked away. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the stellar lance was becoming myth. Most species born after its firing had never heard of it. And those who did dismissed it as council propaganda. After all, who would create a weapon to kill stars? That was something only monsters would do. And the galaxy had no room for monsters. But humanity kept asking questions. Quietly, persistently. Not because they planned to build it, but because they needed to know why it had ever been made in the first place. One Terran historian wrote in her private journal, "To fear knowledge is to surrender to the unknown. Perhaps the Council fears more than the weapon, they fear what we'll become if we're not afraid." She would later die in a shuttle accident. At least, that was the official story. When Earth was finally granted Provisional Council status, they were given access to the restricted historical archives. Not everything, of course, but enough to catch glimpses of truth behind the Council's curated lies. A pattern began to emerge. Every species that ever came close to building something disruptive was either absorbed, destroyed, or erased. The stellar lance was not the only thing banned, it was merely the most dramatic. It became clear. The Council's power wasn't built on peace. It was built on fear, control, obedience. Humanity had seen this before, in their own history. Empires silencing the bold. Monarchs burning books. Tyrants rewriting the past. Earth had learned the hard way that knowledge, real knowledge, was always dangerous to those in power. That's when the idea took root. Not a plan. Not a project. A belief. If the Council feared the weapon, then perhaps they feared the people who understood it even more. Humans didn't want war. They had spilled enough of their own blood across centuries of their own making. But if the galaxy demanded that they kneel in ignorance, then Earth would rise in defiance. And in the silence between the stars, a new generation of Terrans began to study the whispers left behind by a weapon once called the end of all things. They weren't building it. Not yet. But the blueprints were no longer buried. The truth was no longer lost. And somewhere, in a hollowed-out moon orbiting a dead star, the first fragment of something forgotten sparked to life once more. The Council believed the stellar lance was gone forever. They were wrong. Humanity hadn't forgotten. We never forget. They came under the banner of alliance. The Terran fleet answered the Council's call without hesitation. A border conflict had erupted in the Thessari Reach, pirates, extremists, breakaway factions. The usual instability. The Council asked for help stabilizing the region, and humanity answered with peacekeeping fleets, medical convoys, and logistics support. Earth deployed over 200,000 personnel, half of them civilian aid workers. It was the largest humanitarian operation since humanity joined the interstellar community. Within weeks, supply lines were secure. Refugees were being relocated. The sector was stabilizing faster than projected. Reports from Council delegates praised the efficiency of human logistics and field command. But behind closed doors, not everyone was pleased. Some Council races viewed Earth's success as overreach. They respond too quickly, one delegate warned. They coordinate too well. Another muttered. Give them peacekeeping authority today, and they'll take territory tomorrow. Paranoia spread like oil across water. Earth's expanding influence in multiple systems began to unnerve the old power blocks. They said the humans were infiltrating key industries, dominating trade routes, militarizing their fleets. The Council knew it wasn't true, not entirely, but fear doesn't wait for facts. A resolution was drafted in secret. One that would forcibly limit Earth's off-world deployment capabilities, revoke their colonization rights, and reassign their territories under Council oversight. It passed without Terran knowledge. Earth wasn't invited to the session. The betrayal came on the 7th cycle of peacekeeping operations. Without warning, the orbital platforms above Earth's Mars colonies went dark. Within minutes, kinetic strikes rained down. Civilian habitats were annihilated. The Martian terraforming stations, 2 generations in the making, vaporized in seconds. Rescue ships were denied access. Council fleets claimed it was a containment response to unauthorized military expansion. They accused Earth of weaponizing aid missions. and declared the Mars settlements in violation of the Core Stability Accords, a document Earth never signed. Simultaneously, the Moon's orbital ring was dismantled. Terran supply convoys were interdicted in Council space. Over 50,000 unarmed personnel were detained without trial. Earth's ambassador to the Council demanded answers. None were given. Instead, a single statement was transmitted on all diplomatic channels, **. Humanity has violated the trust of this galaxy. Until it can be re-evaluated, Earth is hereby suspended from Council affairs and restricted to its solar system. There was no hearing. No charges. No debate. Just silence and fire. The devastation left Earth staggered. Over 4 million dead. Entire colonies lost. Communications jammed, embassies closed, trade embargoed. Humanity found itself exiled, bleeding, and alone. But not broken. The Council had expected outrage. They expected protests, threats, retaliation. Instead, Earth went quiet. No declaration of war. No public statements. Just one final message broadcast by Earth's highest diplomatic officer, a message now burned into the memory of every Terran. We offered peace. You answered with betrayal. You've taught us what trust is worth in this galaxy. From this moment forward, we will not beg, we will not kneel, and we will not forget. You have fired the first shot. History will remember who fired the last. And then, nothing. Earth cut itself off. No more transmissions. No more ships. Their embassies sealed. Their colonies abandoned or pulled back. Surveillance drones sent to monitor Sol vanished without explanation. The Council assumed humanity had fractured internally. That Earth's silence was surrender. It wasn't. Across human space, mourning turned to rage. Not loud, fiery rage, but cold, calculated fury. They had played by the rules. They had contributed, served, helped. And for that, they were punished. The loss wasn't just political. Families were torn apart, children orphaned, colonies erased, names turned into casualty lists so long they broke data frames. No human remained untouched. Every schoolchild learned the names of the lost. Every city carved memorials in silence. Every Terran nation set aside its disputes. There were no more borders. No more politics. No more factions. There was only Earth. And Earth remembered. Behind layers of encrypted space, far from Council eyes, something began to stir. Not a military campaign. Not yet. But something colder. More permanent. Project records were purged. Civilian spaceports began. Maintenance upgrades. Terran AI systems went dark for reprogramming. And across a dozen asteroid stations, old friends reconnected. Engineers, scientists, logisticians, veterans, all quietly disappearing from public view. Not because they were ordered to. Because they volunteered. The Council celebrated Earth's fall as a strategic success. The humans were growing too fast, they said. They were too unpredictable. But deep down, some among the older races remembered the early days of Earth's rise, how quickly they had adapted, how fiercely they had resisted during first contact, how little it had taken for them to master technology others took centuries to understand. They weren't just fast learners. They were builders. And now, they'd been given a reason to build something else. In the ruins of Martian dust, families gathered. Not to grieve. To promise. That this would never happen again. That Earth would never again be vulnerable to those who claimed to be protectors while acting like tyrants. And across every human system, one question echoed in the minds of survivors. If they feared what we were before, what will they do when they see what we become now? The answer would take years. But it had already begun. 12 years passed. Not a whisper came from Earth. Not a signal. Not a warning. The Council monitored Sol space relentlessly, watching for signs of military buildup or political resurgence, but what they found instead was silence. Drones dispatched into the outer Terran systems never returned. Recon ships sent to the asteroid belts disappeared without trace. Listening stations recorded nothing but static. The Council called it regression, proof that isolating humanity had worked. But silence is not surrender. And absence does not mean abandonment. Inside that silence, something was building. The Kuiper Belt, once a loosely mined frontier, was transformed into a zone of total blackout. Civilian operations were recalled. Navigation beacons were turned off. What remained was dust, rock, and something else, something unseen. Merchant vessels that strayed too close vanished. Those few who made it back said only this, asterisk. There's something out there, and it's watching. Asterisk, the reports were dismissed. Officially, there was nothing. Unofficially, there were patterns. Council analysts noticed orbital shifts too precise to be natural. Mass signatures from celestial bodies that hadn't moved in centuries suddenly changed trajectory with no visible propulsion. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Controlled. The term, dead zone, began circulating in quiet council circles. A place where probes went silent and logic unraveled. Some thought it was a Terran defense grid. Others feared something worse. But no consensus came. Earth remained unresponsive. Meanwhile, across human space, civilian communication was reduced to localized networks. No external trade. No tourism. No diplomatic outreach. Terraforming projects were suspended. Human AI systems, once open for galactic collaboration, went offline entirely. The Council called it self-destruction. Earth called it recalibration. Beneath the surface, Terran research shifted its focus. Not on weapons yet, but on power. Energy manipulation, gravitational stress dynamics, exotic particle containment. The kind of science that had once terrified the galaxy. Projects shelved for being too unstable were reopened under new names, behind untraceable firewalls. The stellar lance had been a myth to most of the younger generation, but now, its design was studied with reverence by those who understood what had been done to Earth. The goal was never to rebuild what had come before. It was to surpass it. Not in scale, but in control. The stellar lance was powerful, but crude. A brute force solution to a galactic problem. What humanity sought now was precision. A weapon that could not only destroy, but choose how, when, and why. They didn't want fear. They wanted certainty. The certainty that no one could do to them again what the Council had done. Deep within the scattered moons of Saturn, hidden labs began testing experimental matter acceleration conduits. On Venus's night side, quantum stabilizers were fired at planetary scale. The data didn't leave the solar system. It didn't need to. Every breakthrough was stored internally, shielded from detection, locked in closed-loop systems that even their own AI couldn't access without biometric authentication. No outside systems. No comms. No leaks. Those who questioned the morality of what was being built were reminded of Mars. There were no more debates. To the rest of the galaxy, it appeared as stagnation. Council reports labeled Earth as strategically inert. Academics suggested Terran civilization was in decline. What they failed to understand was that they were looking at the surface. And humanity had learned to bury its work deep, just like its pain. Recruitment across Terran systems shifted subtly. Engineering academies tripled enrollment. Advanced materials research was prioritized. Defense budgets were quietly absorbed into infrastructure. Every ship built was labeled civilian, but the framework allowed for rapid conversion. Shipyards no longer produced exploration vessels, they produced hulls. Modular. Adaptable. Void-hardened. No announcements were made. There were no parades. Just silence. And in that silence, a name began to circulate within the inner command structures of the Terran Defense Corps. It wasn't official. It wasn't public. But it carried weight. Project Nemesis. It began as a theoretical paper, a thought experiment by a young physicist who had lost his entire family on Mars. What if the stellar lance hadn't been limited by its own containment inefficiencies? What if its energy yield could be redirected and refined instead of detonated outright? What if, instead of collapsing stars, you could collapse fleets? The paper was flagged. Not for deletion, but for escalation. Within a month, that physicist vanished from the public record. So did his research. And so did the 5 scientists assigned to peer review it. The council, unaware of the paper or the name, continued with its internal politics. Petty disputes over trade lanes. Border tensions between minor species. Discussions on AI rights and genetic standardization. The usual distractions. Meanwhile, their sensors near Sol continued to fail. Their agents returned with vague reports, if they returned at all. One scout ship, manned by a non-aligned exploration crew, sent back a short, corrupted signal before going dark. Just 2 words. Asterisk. It's awake. Asterisk. The council dismissed it as atmospheric interference. But the humans didn't. Because Nemesis was no longer a theory. It had become a directive. The directive wasn't issued by a government. It came from a consensus, a silent agreement between the best minds of Earth. They didn't hold public debates. They didn't seek approval. They moved in the only direction left, forward. Project Nemesis began in layers. First as isolated research cells, each assigned a single task: energy storage, material reinforcement, quantum pathway design. No one knew the full picture except a handful of directors, and even they operated with blind spots. The original stellar lance had used crude singularity manipulation to force a collapse event. Nemesis would go further. It wouldn't collapse stars. It would bend them. Compress their energy without destroying the host system. A controlled detonation of raw stellar force, triggered, aimed, and contained. Not a weapon of mass destruction. A weapon of focused extinction. The first problem was scale. There was no known structure that could house the necessary systems without tearing itself apart. Human engineers began testing hybrid composite alloys forged in orbital crucibles. Standard materials failed under simulated load. So they built new ones, atomically interlaced carbon frameworks bonded with gravitational anchors. What emerged was a new form of superstructure, flexible under stress, self-healing under heat. It didn't just survive the pressure. It thrived in it. Power was the second challenge. A planetary grid couldn't charge Nemesis. Not even a fusion lattice. It needed stellar power, directly harvested. The solution was as insane as it was brilliant. A mobile station array designed to orbit brown dwarfs, leaching energy through zero-loss conduits into containment fields the size of cities. Each field had to be stabilized by on-board AI cores with redundant consciousnesses to prevent collapse. Even one miscalculation would result in annihilation. But the minds of Earth had already accounted for this. They didn't automate Nemesis. They manned it. Volunteers, trained in neural synchronization, were implanted with interface arrays, allowing them to guide the system manually through thought. A symbiosis between machine and mind. The pilots would not be operators. They would become the weapon. And they knew the cost. Every candidate accepted death as part of the equation. There was no escape plan. No ejection sequence. Once Nemesis reached full activation, those inside became part of the core, locked into a fusion of biology and physics that couldn't be undone. They didn't flinch. Because Mars was still burning in their memories. Construction required secrecy and scale. The Kuiper Belt was transformed into a ghost shipyard. Automated haulers and nanofabricators assembled modules in silence. Nemesis wasn't built in one place. It was grown across thousands of segments, connected by vacuum-traversing superlinks. When it finally came together, the array spanned over 100 kilometers, a weapon the size of a moon, with no clear front or back, its shape fluid depending on the phase of activation. But mass wasn't the weapon. Precision was. Nemesis could aim its output to a single point, focused to within 10 meters, even across light minutes of distance. With real-time quantum entanglement relays, it could fire, adjust, and fire again before the enemy even knew it had been targeted. Unlike the stellar lance, it didn't simply destroy, it erased. Final testing was conducted in the shadows of dead systems. Rogue planets and black dwarfs were chosen as targets. Every test yielded success. Not explosions, not fireballs. Just silence. The target would vanish. No light. No radiation. No debris. A perfect kill. The inner circle overseeing the project labeled the effect absolute negation. The energy matrix produced by Nemesis didn't just disrupt matter, it displaced it from normal space, shifting targets into an unreachable dimension of entropy. Theoretical physics called it impossible. Humanity called it progress. AI cores, once sidelined by council treaties, were now integrated directly into Nemesis's logic chains. Not as commanders, but as partners. Designed to evolve in real time, adapting tactics, managing stress limits, coordinating power flows. Human minds made the decisions. The AI made them faster. And in case of compromise, every AI system was hard-coded to terminate itself if given conflicting orders. There would be no rogue machine uprising. Only mutual understanding. Security was absolute. No communication entered or left the Nemesis facility without biometric confirmation from 3 human directors and 4 AI node clusters. Every module had redundant command locks. Sabotage was impossible. Not from within, and not from beyond. The final phase was integration, combining the massive structure into a mobile framework. Nemesis was never meant to stay in one place. It would move through systems silently, unseen until it chose to fire. Using gravitational slip drives, it could phase shift short distances without detectable energy spikes, making it immune to traditional tracking. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a ghost. And it needed a crew. Not soldiers. Not engineers. Witnesses. Individuals chosen not only for skill, but for memory. Every crew member had lost someone to the Council's betrayal. Every one of them carried pain sharpened into purpose. They weren't there to fire Nemesis. They were there to remember why it had to be fired. The final activation took place in orbit around a rogue gas giant, thousands of light years from any Council detection grid. The sequence took 31 minutes. AI nodes synchronized. Power fields stabilized. The core began pulsing like a newborn star. And when the last subroutine completed, the system spoke its first and only words. Asterisk. Nemesis operational. Awaiting directive. Asterisk. Earth had not built a weapon of vengeance. They had built a warning. A line carved in the void saying only this. Never again. The Council never saw it coming. Not because they weren't watching, but because they no longer believed humanity was capable of surprise. They had written Earth off as contained, as broken, as done. The moment Nemesis was complete, that illusion ended. The test wasn't announced. There was no ceremony. Only coordinates were chosen, a long-dead system on the outer edge of what had once been Terran trading space. 6 planets, 1 decaying moon, and a blue dwarf nearing collapse. A forgotten place. That's where Nemesis moved for the first time under its own power. There were no fleet escorts. No crew outside the core command node. Just Nemesis itself, drifting through the dark, silent and focused. The Council didn't detect the movement. No gravitational signature. No propulsion trail. Only a brief flicker on long-range deep space sensors, dismissed as a natural anomaly. Nemesis targeted the 3rd planet. An iron-rich world with a cracked crust and 0 atmospheric density. A stable mass. The kind of object that could truly measure the weapon's output. At precisely 1900 hours Earth Standard Time, the firing sequence began. The entire structure contracted inward. Not visually, but in the readings. Containment fields aligned, quantum threads wove through the core, and for one brief second, the energy of a dying star was focused into a single point. There was no beam. No flash. The planet simply vanished. Not exploded. Not broken. Gone. No fragments. No radiation spike. No gravitational echo. The space where it had existed now returned a reading of 0 mass. 0 heat. 0 presence. As if the planet had never formed. Even nearby stellar bodies no longer registered its past gravitational influence. It was absolute erasure. The remaining planetary bodies were untouched. No shockwaves. No orbital changes. Nemesis had done what no weapon in galactic history had ever done. It had unmade matter with surgical precision. The surrounding space remained intact, a quiet void where a world had once been. Data was logged instantly. AI cores processed millions of variables. Human observers cross-verified the results. And when it was complete, the crew inside Nemesis transmitted a single encrypted message back to Earth. Asterisk. Validation confirmed. Effect radius stable. Targeting margin within 0.0002% variance. Nemesis is ready. Asterisk. No reply was necessary. Back on Earth, leadership, now unified under a single defense directive, received the data and initiated Phase 2. Project Nemesis was no longer theoretical. It was no longer developmental. It was operational. The Council didn't learn of the test until 2 weeks later. A patrol ship passing near the dead system picked up a strange void in its scans. Where once there had been a planet, there was now nothing. Initial assumptions blamed a rare quantum collapse. Until the patrol crew reviewed the archived star charts. The world had been there. Confirmed. Surveyed. Mapped. The incident report was escalated to the High Council. A second team was dispatched. This time with advanced survey drones. What they found defied known physics. The planet's removal hadn't disturbed the system. The gravitational balance was preserved, as if the mass had never existed. The Council's top physicists were brought in. They couldn't explain it. Then came the intercept. An anonymous transmission, untraceable, encrypted on Terran frequencies. Asterisk. This is not an act of war. This is a demonstration. If you think we seek revenge, you misunderstand. We seek balance. Do not force us to bring Nemesis to your stars. Asterisk. No signature. No demand. Just a warning. The Council panicked. Emergency sessions were called. The idea that humanity had not only survived but created something capable of erasing celestial bodies without a trace shattered their strategic models. Dozens of scenarios were simulated. None ended favorably. They tried to locate Nemesis. They couldn't. It didn't leave a trail. It didn't broadcast signals. It moved like a shadow. Their best sensors picked up nothing. Their best analysts couldn't model its capabilities. One admiral said it plainly. Asterisk. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it is. And we have no idea how to stop it. Asterisk. The Council demanded Earth respond. Formal envoys were dispatched. No answers came. The Terran diplomatic network remained silent. Borders stayed closed. Human ships, rare as they were, never lingered in known space. They passed through, fast, cloaked, unreachable. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Council felt fear. Not the fear of a fleet, but the fear of something invisible, untouchable, inevitable. The kind of fear that lingers in silence. Some factions demanded preemptive action, strike Sol before Nemesis could be deployed again. Others argued that such a move would ensure retaliation. After all, if Nemesis could erase a planet without destabilizing the system, what would it do to a Council capital? But the truth was worse. Humanity hadn't threatened war. They hadn't declared anything. They had simply reminded the galaxy that they were watching. That they hadn't forgotten. And that they were done playing by the Council's rules. The Council had created Nemesis the moment they betrayed Earth. They thought they were silencing a rising threat. Instead, they had given it purpose. And now, it was awake. They scrambled. Within hours of the intercept, the Council entered a state of unprecedented lockdown. Every military asset was placed on alert. Diplomats were recalled. Starport traffic in central sectors was restricted. Entire fleets were repositioned, not for war, but for containment. The Council's official stance was one of caution. The internal discussions were chaos. Fear had fractured them. Humanity had proven they possessed a weapon capable of absolute annihilation, and no one, not a single species, had any idea where it was. Not what it looked like. Not how it moved. Not how it killed. Just that it could. And that it already had. The idea that Earth could build such a thing wasn't just terrifying, it was insulting. The elder species had considered humanity primitive, too new to understand restraint, too reckless to be trusted with ancient knowledge. That assumption had been the foundation of the ban. The stellar lance had nearly destroyed a galactic arm once. The Council banned it to prevent further disaster. But now a version far more refined existed, not in theory, but in orbit, and no law had stopped it. Their ban had failed. Their sanctions had failed. And their betrayal had created the very threat they feared. Internal blame spiraled. Intelligence departments were torn apart. Dozens of analysts were arrested. The Council demanded to know how Earth had managed to build Nemesis under their nose. Reports were reviewed again and again. The warning signs had been there, subtle, buried under assumptions. Decreased energy exports, silent trade hubs, orbital reconfigurations, solar harvest patterns that didn't match civilian needs. It was all there. They just hadn't believed Earth was capable of hiding something so vast for so long. They sent observers next. Not diplomats, ships. A small reconnaissance fleet, shielded and cloaked, dispatched to the edge of Sol. The mission was simple: observe and withdraw. Stay hidden. Collect data. They never came back. No transmissions. No wreckage. No trace. The Council's military wing declared the mission lost. Quietly. Publicly, they said it was a sensor failure. Anomalies in deep space. But behind closed doors, everyone knew. Nemesis had seen them. And let no evidence remain. The debate shifted from, "What is Nemesis?" to, "What does Earth want?" But no demands came. No ultimatums. Just silence. That, more than anything, unhinged the Council. Threats can be negotiated. Silence offers no leverage. Some member species pushed for negotiation anyway. A faction of diplomats argued Earth was acting out of trauma, that communication would bring resolution. Others scoffed. You don't negotiate with an extinction protocol. Still, after weeks of deadlock, the Council agreed to attempt contact. A message was composed. It acknowledged the attack on Mars. It expressed regret, carefully avoiding the word apology. It offered peace, access, reintegration. All the old diplomacy, reshaped for survival. The message was sent on every known Terran frequency. No answer. A second message followed, this time with offers of reparations. Trade concessions. Military de-escalation agreements. Again, nothing. Earth hadn't rejected the offer. They had ignored it. Worse, their silence was not passive. In the weeks following the messages, Council fleets reported anomalies along the outer systems. Drones disappeared. Stargates glitched. Navigation satellites reported minor orbital drifts that made no physical sense. Subtle, untraceable interference. Not damage. Presence. Earth was showing them that they could reach anywhere. And do anything. The panic spread. Civilian populations across core Council worlds began questioning their leaders. What was being done about Earth? Why weren't they being protected? Conspiracy forums exploded. Stories of Nemesis multiplied, most of them fictional, all of them terrifying. Some claimed Earth had built multiple weapons. Others whispered of fleets no longer made of metal but of living machines. No proof existed, but no one could disprove it either. The military wanted options. Plans. Retaliation scenarios. But no strategist could promise success. Not when Nemesis couldn't be found, let alone targeted. And any assault on Earth risked triggering a real activation. They began to consider the unthinkable. Total evacuation protocols. Not of fringe systems. Of capitals. Because if Nemesis moved against them, no defense existed. The species that once ridiculed Earth now feared even speaking its name. A human envoy did arrive, eventually. Not in person. Not even in real time. A pre-recorded message broadcast on an old diplomatic channel. The speaker wore no uniform. No insignia. Just a simple gray jacket and tired eyes. He didn't threaten. He didn't yell. He simply explained. The message was brief. You broke your own laws. You weaponized fear. You destroyed our cities and called it justice. Then you erased our voice and called it peace. We didn't retaliate. We rebuilt. You taught us that trust is weakness. So we made something strong enough to make trust unnecessary. We don't want your counsel. We don't want your approval. We want distance. And if that distance is not respected, Nemesis will speak again. The transmission ended. No reply was requested. The council met for 72 hours without break. In the end, they reached a single conclusion. Earth would not be engaged. No military action. No surveillance. No negotiation. All forces were ordered to withdraw from Terran proximity. Earth was reclassified from restricted zone to strategic anomaly, do not approach. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council chose surrender over control. Not because they wanted to. Because they had no choice. 12 years of silence ended with a pulse. Not a signal. Not a declaration. A gravitational shift recorded across 27 sectors. A ripple that defied explanation. It wasn't an explosion, or a mass jump. It was more like the void bent inward, just for a moment, and then released. The origin point was deep space, far beyond the Council's surveillance networks. Within hours, the anomaly vanished. But something else appeared. A fleet. No warning, no fanfare. Just hundreds of ships emerging from blackness, silent and synchronized. They bore no Council markings, no recognizable signatures. Sleek, dark-hulled, matte-plated vessels with no exposed thrusters or comm arrays. They moved like shadows, quiet, efficient, precise. The Council's early warning systems lit up, unable to classify them. Identification protocols failed. It was only when one of the ships passed close to an old relay beacon that a single code pinged back. Earth origin confirmed. The Terran fleet was back. And this time, they weren't answering a call. Their approach was methodical. No erratic movements. No aggression. They didn't fire. They didn't speak. They simply arrived, stationing themselves in high orbit around key trade routes, Council monitoring zones, and high-traffic stargates. Then they waited. The Council hesitated, unsure whether to treat the presence as a provocation or a message. But as more ships appeared, hundreds, then thousands, it became clear. This was no mere patrol. Earth wasn't visiting. They were establishing position. In a matter of days, entire sectors had Terran oversight. Not through force, but through presence. The kind of presence that made other ships change course. That made traders cancel routes. That made patrol fleets divert out of range. Nemesis hadn't fired again. It hadn't needed to. The threat was implied, and the galaxy understood. But the ships weren't the only surprise. Allied worlds that had remained neutral during Earth's exile began to respond. Independents. Outer colonies. Former Terran partners. Some had gone silent when Earth was attacked, fearing retribution. Others had severed ties under Council pressure. Now, one by one, they returned. Not under banners or treaties, just silence broken by simple actions. Docking ports opened. Trade resumed. Civilian traffic re-established. Terran diplomats were received without condition. These worlds didn't join Earth. They stood beside it. Not because they were forced, but because they remembered what the Council had done, and who had tried to help rebuild afterward. Earth had never asked for support. Now it no longer needed to. A new alliance began to form. Unofficial, unratified, but real. Shared technology, joint defense agreements, encrypted communication corridors. Not a government. A principle. Built on mutual understanding that no power, no matter how ancient, had the right to erase another. The Terran fleet made no demands. But they made their presence felt. They operated in silence. No open broadcasts. No public declarations. Yet every move they made was strategic. Blockades lifted from starving planets, slaver convoys intercepted, corrupt council-aligned governors deposed in quiet, surgical strikes. Evidence left behind. Names of the missing returned. Victims recovered. Justice served without spectacle. Human ships didn't flaunt power. They demonstrated it. One event changed everything. A council carrier group was en route to reinforce a border conflict in the Kellery Expanse. 6 warships, heavily armed, equipped with full-spectrum shielding. They passed within Terran-monitored space without requesting clearance. A warning was transmitted, just coordinates and a redirect notice. The council ignored it. 17 minutes later, the entire carrier group was immobilized. Engines dead. Systems cold. No damage. No casualties. Just complete shutdown. Recovery ships arrived days later to find their crews conscious but disoriented, systems unrecoverable, AI cores wiped clean. The message was understood. Earth's fleet didn't just carry weapons. They were weapons. And the message spread fast. No council ship entered Terran space again without explicit permission. Across the galaxy, the narrative changed. No longer was Earth seen as the reckless newcomer. Now they were the boundary. The wall no one dared test. Not because of the fleet. But because of what still hadn't appeared. Nemesis. The weapon that had erased a planet still hadn't been seen. Its silence was louder than any speech. Rumors spread. Some said it was moving between systems. Others believed it never left Earth space. The most dangerous theory suggested there were more than one. But no one knew. And no one wanted to find out. Because every time Earth moved, they moved with purpose. And that purpose had never been revenge. It was deterrence. A reminder that Earth had learned the rules. And rewritten them. Where once Terrans had asked to belong, now they dictated the terms of engagement through precision, presence, and absolute resolve. The fleet didn't gloat. They didn't occupy. They didn't conquer. They returned. And the galaxy remembered what it meant to be watched by eyes that never forgot. Across the Council's networks, something shifted, not a battle, not a declaration, but a slow and undeniable unraveling of authority. The more Earth remained silent, the more their silence eroded the illusion of control the Council had long maintained. Worlds once thought to be obedient began asking questions. Why had Earth been exiled? What was the real reason behind the Stellar Lance ban? Why had the Terrans, of all species, been punished for surviving? These questions weren't coming from radicals. They were coming from mid-level officials, respected scientists, trade guilds, and even a few retired council commanders who had nothing left to lose. The answers, when they came, were damning. Declassified reports surfaced, records of early meetings where the council debated Earth's potential, not its threat. A transcript revealed that Earth had been voted into isolation not for a crime, but for fear that their technological unpredictability would destabilize the galactic hierarchy. The truth was out. Earth hadn't broken a law, they had broken a balance. They had risen too fast. Innovated too wildly. And instead of mentorship, they were given a cage. Now that cage was gone. And the species who'd helped forge its bars were starting to regret it. Inside Council headquarters, chaos reigned. The Security Assembly couldn't agree on how to respond. Some pushed for renewed outreach, a desperate diplomatic maneuver to bring Earth back into the fold. Others argued for increased militarization, citing the spreading influence of Terran fleets. But it was too late. Earth wasn't negotiating. They were setting precedent. Neutral worlds began to model their defense protocols after Terran patterns: modular fleets, decentralized command structures, AI-first infrastructure. Even Council-aligned territories started to abandon their ancient protocols in favor of Terran innovation. The reason was simple: Terran systems worked. They were cleaner, faster, more secure. Not because of scale, but because they had been built without compromise. Earth had done in exile what the Council had never allowed, started over, free from bureaucracy, guided by necessity, not tradition. This shift didn't go unnoticed. Several member species attempted to copy Earth's approach outright. One such attempt, a rapid tech development initiative, in the vast Confederacy, collapsed within weeks when their leadership tried to mimic Terran AI control systems without understanding their safeguards. An autonomous satellite defense grid misidentified a civilian ship and vaporized a trade fleet. The resulting backlash triggered riots. But even then, the populace didn't blame Earth. They blamed their leaders for trying to replicate Terran precision without Terran integrity. Because that was the truth behind Earth's strength. It wasn't just the weapons. It was the will. The restraint. The principle. Nemesis didn't dominate the galaxy by firing. It dominated by not firing. Because Earth understood what the Council never did, power isn't proven by destruction. It's proven by how much destruction you choose not to unleash. One Council faction, increasingly desperate, devised a plan to expose the weakness in Terran control. They would send a cloaked probe into a Terran-monitored system, one program to transmit false signals mimicking a civilian distress call from a neutral world. The idea was to bait Earth into revealing their fleet's location, maybe even forcing them to fire. The probe never transmitted. 3 minutes after entering Terran space, it vanished. A reply came not as a threat, but a simple code, transmitted once. Deception logged. Repeat, and retaliation will not be silent. That was all. And it was enough. Because Earth didn't just have technology. They had discipline. That terrified the Council more than anything. A species capable of building Nemesis and choosing to keep it dormant. Among the younger species, Earth was rapidly becoming something else entirely. Not a government, not a faction, but a symbol. The Terran model became a movement, decentralized, transparent, merit-driven, and most importantly, unbound by the old Council's stagnation. Educational hubs broadcast Terran physics theories. Independent stations played old Terran broadcasts, documentaries, and war logs. Their culture, once deemed too aggressive or emotional, was now seen as authentic. Real. Survivors who had been silenced, and who now carried the weight of survival without apology. Every Terran fleet orbiting the stars was a monument, not to war, but to warning. Not to conquest, but to consequence. The Council began to fracture from within. Smaller factions broke off, demanding reforms. Some worlds voted to leave entirely. Others tried to revise history, pretending they'd always supported Earth. But the records were clear. Earth didn't erase what was done. They made sure no one forgot. And that became the most dangerous part of their return. They didn't seek vengeance. They brought accountability. And in a galaxy built on forgetting the uncomfortable, Earth became the memory that wouldn't fade. Their fleets never campaigned. They stabilized. Their weapons were quiet. Their intentions clearer than any politician's speech. We are here. We remember. And we are watching. The turning point wasn't a battle. It was a choice, one the galaxy didn't expect Earth to make. A border world known as Ixal Prime had fallen into crisis. Once an independent trade colony, it had been overrun by mercenaries funded by a council-backed syndicate. Their goal was simple: destabilize the outer systems aligned with Terran philosophy and reclaim influence without open warfare. No one expected Earth to respond. It wasn't their territory. There were no Terran civilians there. No treaties. Just suffering. But Earth responded anyway. Without warning or formal declaration, a formation of Terran ships arrived in low orbit. They didn't broadcast demands. They didn't negotiate. They deployed. In under 6 hours, the mercenary presence was neutralized. Not obliterated, disarmed, restrained, extracted. No civilian casualties. Minimal infrastructure damage. Every captured leader was handed over to local authorities, along with complete documentation of their funding routes, tactical comms, and bribe records. Earth didn't claim the victory. They didn't claim the planet. They just left. That single act shattered a century of political calculation. Because Earth had done what the Council never did, acted without self-interest. It wasn't power projection. It was principle enforcement. Earth had decided that sovereignty didn't mean isolation. That neutrality didn't excuse inaction. And in doing so, they made a quiet statement that echoed louder than any speech: humanity stood for something again. The impact was immediate. 6 more fringe worlds requested Terran defense consultation. 3 systems broke their Council trade compacts and opened corridors to Terran-aligned zones. An emergency session was called within the Council core. Panic leaked into the public. Not because of an invasion, but because Earth wasn't playing by anyone's script. They weren't conquering. They weren't retaliating. They were restoring balance where others had profited from chaos. That terrified the elite more than war. Because you can fight armies. You can't fight integrity. Earth's model wasn't enforced through fear, it was adopted through results. In territory after territory, systems stabilized. Piracy dropped. Trade resumed. Civil disputes were handled without weapons. And everywhere Earth passed, they left something behind: infrastructure, security, trust. Not flags. Not rulers. Not demands. Even Nemesis, still unseen, became more than a weapon. It became an idea. The symbol of Earth's choice. Not vengeance, but vigilance. Not dominance, but deterrence. A galaxy that once feared its firepower now feared its restraint. And then the Council made its final mistake. In a closed-door session, under pressure from hardliner species, a covert task force was authorized to strike a Terran forward station. The goal wasn't to destroy it, but to force Earth's hand. To get a response that could be labeled aggression and justify full-scale sanctions. The strike was surgical: tactical jammers, non-lethal EMP payloads, no intended loss of life. But Earth didn't respond with missiles. They responded with data. Within an hour of the attack, every member of the covert task force had their operations exposed. Names, locations, bank accounts, communication threads, all publicly posted. Not just the soldiers. The authors of the plan. The funders. The silent enablers. Then came the message, encrypted, 1 line long. We do not strike first. But we never forget. The Council's unity collapsed. 7 core worlds denounced the operation publicly. 3 withdrew from all joint military agreements. Whistleblowers emerged, leaking documents that exposed decades of manipulation, resource hoarding, and controlled destabilization under the Council's authority, all meant to keep Earth contained, and others dependent. And through it all, Earth remained silent. They didn't gloat. They didn't expand. They simply kept doing what they always had: building, stabilizing, helping. With every world they aided, with every corrupt system they exposed, with every life they saved, they made the old order look smaller. Petty. Outdated. Because the truth was undeniable now. Earth had been forged in exile. Their strength didn't come from dominance. It came from rejection. From being forced to stand alone, and choosing to rise anyway. And that kind of strength couldn't be banned. It couldn't be legislated. It could only be earned. Where once the Council set the rules, Earth now set the example. Where once they were treated as a threat, they became the standard. And no matter how many ships they built, or how many systems they reached, it wasn't their firepower that changed the galaxy. It was the reminder that justice, once denied, never dies quietly. It comes back sharper. And it remembers everything. They called it the Reckoning, not because of a war, but because of what came after. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, was facing the collapse of its oldest structure, the Council. What had once been untouchable, unchallenged, and self-appointed as the universal authority was now fractured beyond repair. Systems were defecting not by violence, but by choice. Not one shot fired. No fleets clashing. Just a quiet, unstoppable migration of loyalty. Away from the Council. Toward Earth. But Earth didn't crown itself a new ruler. That's what made it more powerful. Humanity didn't replace the Council. It replaced the need for one. Where the Council had governed through control, Earth influenced through example. Where they dictated terms, humanity offered support. Their systems were open source. Their blueprints shared. They taught others how to stand, not how to kneel. It wasn't empire. It was empowerment. Terran oversight teams were requested, not assigned. Their security units acted only when invited. Their advisory networks operated transparently, broadcast for any species to witness. There were no backroom deals. No puppet leaders. Every Terran policy came with one consistent message: you govern yourselves. We only keep the peace. That peace, in time, became the new order. The last holdouts in the Council tried to resist, but their resistance only accelerated the collapse. When they threatened sanctions on Terran-aligned systems, those systems simply cut ties with Council trade networks, only to see their economies improve under Terran logistical models. When they tried to bribe Terran personnel, they were exposed immediately. When they threatened force, they were met with silence, and that silence became the loudest deterrent in the galaxy. Because by now, everyone knew what that silence meant. Nemesis. Still never seen in full. Still never used. But always there. Not as a ship. As a promise. The promise that if the galaxy ever again returned to tyranny, cruelty, or systemic exploitation, Nemesis would awaken. Not to conquer, but to end it. And no one wanted to test if that promise was real. The legend only grew. Scholars dissected every known detail of Earth's exile, tracing how humanity went from a silenced species to a galactic cornerstone. They discovered something few had realized: humanity never wanted power. They were forced to earn it by being denied it. Every policy, every defense mechanism, every cultural shift had emerged not from ambition, but necessity. Earth had not been shaped by war. Earth had been shaped by betrayal. And when they came back, they didn't seek revenge, they built something better. Soon, other exiled species started to rise. Minorities long ignored by the Council's bureaucracy were given resources through Earth's knowledge exchanges. Lost colonies reconnected. Forgotten systems, long written off as irrelevant, suddenly thrived under Terran trade models. The spiral of change became exponential. It was no longer about Earth. It was about what Earth represented. Accountability. Transparency. Responsibility. And above all, choice. For the first time in galactic history, species had the power to say no. To walk away from forced dependence. To define their futures without fear of silent retaliation. Because Earth had shown them that strength wasn't about domination. It was about resilience. The Council didn't end in flames. It ended in irrelevance. Its chambers still existed, empty and echoing. Its archives remained, untouched and dusty. But the real decisions, the real alliances, the real innovations, they were happening elsewhere. In Terran outreach hubs. In cooperative networks that spanned hundreds of systems. In multilingual broadcasts where species once deemed inferior now led discussions on planetary sustainability and galactic ethics. The future no longer belonged to any one race. It belonged to all. Because Earth, in being exiled, had discovered a truth the Council never could: when you strip away power, what remains is purpose. And Earth's purpose had never been to rule. It was to ensure that no one else would ever suffer what they did. So they built weapons not to destroy, but to guard. They built fleets not to conquer, but to shield. And they built Nemesis not as a final word, but as a final warning. That no matter how far the galaxy expanded, no matter how complex its systems became, there would always be someone watching. Not from thrones. Not from palaces. But from silence. Waiting. Ready. Not to strike first, but to make sure no tyrant ever struck last. And so, without a single proclamation, without ever raising a flag or demanding allegiance, Earth became something greater than a superpower. They became the conscience of the stars. And the galaxy would never forget it.